This is Beyond the Green Screen, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.
Hi there, Royal Norman. Welcome to Beyond the Green Screen. It's the podcast for the First Alert forecasters. And our guest today is Zach Brooks, who I became infatuated with his farm, the worm farm. I met you during COVID, as you remember.
You did.
Because a lot of people were doing, home planting and learning about that. I'd always done it. And then I heard about this guy raising worms and making this great soil and all this kind of stuff. So that's when I went down and met you. Now, before we start to talk about the worm farm, you weren't always a worm farmer, were you?
I was not.
What did you do before you were a worm farmer?
So I got an MBA from ASU in 1982, and went to work as a business consultant. Worked at a big management consulting firm. Was part of the partner group that took that public in 2002, and a couple of years later I was able to sort of semi-retire. Went back to ASU to get a second master's in sustainability with a focus on climate management and control. Got about halfway through that program and decided I didn't really want to, that really wasn't it. I wanted to try it. And so we created the Arizona Worm Farm to be a fully sustainable, off-the-grid farm where we turn sunshine, rainwater, and other people's garbage into food and shelter and entertainment for ourselves.
So where did that sustainability idea come from for you? How did that evolve?
My favorite Marie Curie quote in relation to radioactivity is, "I learn more so I can fear less." And so I was worried about climate change, and I thought if I just learn more about it, I won't be as nervous. And what I found is the more I learned, the more nervous I became. So it didn't work for me, but it gave me an opportunity to create a sustainability-focused enterprise.
So why did you decide, I mean, I know you live here in the Valley, but why did you decide Phoenix? You might have been able to pick, let's just say, less harsher climates than Phoenix to do this project, but you just decided Phoenix because you live here?
Yeah, my family's been here since the late 1920s. My grandchildren are going to Madison Simas School, which is the school that their father went to and I went to.
Oh, wow.
So we've lived in Central Phoenix my whole life. I explored a lot of different worm farms, and what I found is you can do it anywhere. It's easier or harder depending on the climate and the conditions, but you can do it anywhere. And I thought, this is home. Let's figure out how to do it where I want to do it.
So you got 10 acres in the south part of Phoenix.
Yep.
And the sustainability side, the goal, we've talked about this. I wonder if the goal has changed, but was to basically 10 families, is that right? Off 10 acres?
Yeah. Our North Star initially was 10 families on 10 acres using, again, just sunshine and rainwater and other people's garbage.
Yeah.
And we've now got two. We put together a fully sustainable straw and adobe house that people can come down and visit and see. It's in our food forest, and we have another small house. So we're making our way through that. When we bought the land in 2017, it took us about a year to get permits and entitlements and stuff like that. So we count 2018 as our first year. That puts us halfway through a 10-year plan, and I would say we're 35% of the way to where we wanted to be.
Well, that's still pretty good. What's the toughest part of that? Is it the water? Is it electricity? What's the part is going to be the hardest to integrate?
No, enough water falls on our farm to do everything that we want to do.
Okay.
The water isn't an issue, although a repository is. We need if we're going to truly be completely free of anything else, then we need a big cistern, and that's really expensive. And so we're trying to figure out how to do that. No, honestly, the thing I'm most disappointed with is that industry hasn't kept up with where I had hoped it would be to help us solve two problems. I won't call them misbehaving, but they're the two things that I'd really like to fix. Mm-hmm. One is I'd like to be completely off fossil fuels.
Okay.
And in order to do that, I need an electric tractor and electric trucks that function the same way that our diesel trucks do. And a couple of places are working on some stuff, but they're not really ready for prime time.
Right.
So that's going to come a little bit later than we wanted. And we still sell stuff to folks in bags. And I had expected that by now, 5 or 6 years into our journey, we'd be able to buy a backyard compostable bag that worked. And it still doesn't exist yet. But I'm hoping in the next year or 2 or 3, there are people who are working on it, who are exploring different polymers. There's a fascinating company in Mexico that's working with the seeds of avocados to make stuff. So I'm optimistic that that's coming.
It's coming. Okay.
Yep.
So I was amazed at all the stuff that's on the farm. Of course, I went out there because I heard about the worms. Now, initially, did you think the worms were going to be as big a deal as they were and are?
No. So the initial vision called for 2 or 3 acres of worms and worm castings, because the worms make our soil wonderful.
Right.
Anybody who's got worms in their garden knows that they want worms in their garden.
Yes.
And then we were going to have 7 acres of vegetables. The first crop of vegetables that we planted were watermelon. And by the time we were ready to harvest those watermelon, the cost to harvest them was less than the vegetable brokers would pay us for those watermelon. And so it just became it wasn't going to be a moneymaker.
Yes.
And we found that we were making a really good compost to use to feed our worms and for our gardens. We found that people who came to get our worms and worm castings were also interested in our compost and then in our raised bed mix. And so those things, we kind of pivoted to now making, so now that 7 acres is used to make compost and raised bed mix to make it easier for you to garden in your backyard.
Yeah, it's crazy, all the stuff that you can go down there and basically, well, let me just say this. You can't fail if you buy your stuff to start a garden because it's so good. It really is so good. It's amazing. And I want to tell folks about the worms. I started, is it called vermicomposting? Yeah. And the thing I liked about it, I did that first, as you know, just to see how it worked. And the thing I liked about it is a whole lot faster than composting. Composting is boring. It's just, but you got these worms running around and doing stuff and eating stuff quicker. And that was kind of fun, right? And so when I finally, though, figured out as it was getting hot and where I had my worms, I got to transition because we're going to have 110, 115. So as I've told you, my worms ended up in my raised gardens. That's where they started. And I was pretty sure they would be protected enough from the heat. They were. And now the worms are not only in my raised gardens where I put them, but they're in my lawn. If I plant a new bush, they're in the ground there. Worms love to go places, don't they?
They absolutely do. And the worms that we sell, which are red wigglers, they live comfortably from 90 degrees to 30 degrees in the soil. And as you know, we never have to worry about our soil getting colder than 30 degrees.
Yeah.
Even when it's 22 degrees outside, the soil is still going to be in the 40s and 50s. And even when our ambient temperatures are 110, our soils are generally below 90. If your plants are happy, then your worms are going to be happy.
Right.
And they'll multiply. If you feed them, they'll multiply more rapidly. And there's no downside to having worms in your garden. They're self-limiting. They won't multiply too much to where they out populate the territory. But they don't have teeth. They won't eat your carrots or your beets or your radishes. They're just going to consume the stuff that falls, the leaves and the roots and the things that naturally live in the soil. Yeah. They're going to consume that. They're going to produce microbes. It'll convert the organic material into what your plants need at the time your plants need it.
And the crazy thing about what I learned, a trick from y'all and reading your stuff, is that I don't have to, like when I'm done with a plant in my planter, I don't have to pull it off. I just cut it off because the worms like that will get rid of the rest of it and they'll enjoy it. It's really kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, it's again, all we're trying to do is to emulate what happens in the forest.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same thing. And frankly, it's lazier gardening. If you do this, gardening gets easier and easier and easier every year as your soil gets better and better, and you're not out there with a tiller or a pitchfork or a shovel trying to turn that stuff. If you do this well, you'll have fewer weeds, you'll have less disease, and you'll have a less hospitable environment for pests.
Yeah, and when I was doing the vermicomposting, and then you would give me some ideas on how to separate it, and then, hey, Royal, you don't really have to separate. Anyway, long story short, the stuff you get from vermicomposting is amazing. I mean, and that I was making that in my backyard and then putting it in my planters was just amazing to me, because it just seemed like it's just this thick, black, fantastic soil-like product.
Yeah, and we do that on a commercial scale. We make that fresh castings that you can get, and you come down and buy it. But I'd much rather sell you worms. It's a one-time purchase. Mm-hmm. They'll fertilize your garden forever and ever and ever. Yeah. And it's crazy easy.
Yeah, it really is. That's for sure. So how many worms do you have now?
I think I have 2.5 million.
Is that called a herd? Is that a herd?
That's what we call it.
You call it a herd, okay.
We call it a herd of worms.
Yeah.
We sample 1 foot square sizes of our wedges in our breeding operations, and we actually do count them once in a while just to do that, and then we do math. So we're between 2.5 and 3 million worms. Our breeding programs produce 100,000 worms a week, which is about the number of worms that we sell every week.
That is amazing.
It's awesome.
So now you're also growing. I've gotten starter plants from you. You're also growing your own garden. Tell us a little bit about that, because that's part of the sustainability thing. You want to be able to raise food there too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Our one of our aspirations is, so we've got about 11 or 12 people who work on the farm, plus some interns and part-time folks. One of our aspirations is to feed everyone from the farm every single day. So I'd like everyone to take home a salad, eggs every single day. We can do that really easily from mid-November until the end of April. It's harder in the summertime unless you like okra or Malabar spinach.
Yes.
I mean, there's stuff we can grow in the summer. It's just not as tasty.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But yeah, we're trying to do that. We've also we grow our vegetable starts in our starter mix, which contains not only worm castings, but insect frass, which is just a fancy way of saying insect poop. Yeah. Contains a lot of really good stuff, the most prominent being an enzyme called chitin. And by introducing chitin into the plant when it's brand new, it starts to protect itself from the inside out against diseases and against pests. It's basically sensing that there are pests present when there aren't any. And so it starts to protect itself. It's not an insecticide. It won't kill them. But it's like putting bars on your window at your house. It just makes your house less hospitable to a burglar than the one next to it without it. So we get very high germination rates and very high success rates. Folks that come down and buy our starts tend to have more successful gardens.
You should see how many tomatillas I have from the last tomatilla
awesome.
start. No, they're all over the place. But by the way, I really worked hard to protect them this past summer, because it was, as you know, it was a terrible summer. I decided that's where that's the hill I was going to protect. And man, I'm getting so much tomatillo now. It's fantastic. Yeah. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
So tell me, it's more than starts and it's more than growing stuff. I don't want to call them fertilizers, because worm poop isn't really fertilizer, right? You wouldn't call it fertilizer.
Right. In fact, the NPK in worm castings is relatively modest.
Okay.
What you get in worm castings is microbes. You get living, breathing organisms that convert what's in your soil into what the plants need. And that process, there are microbes in good compost, but the addition of worms and worm castings just jack up the number of microbes dramatically. And then you get nature doing what nature does. It takes the stuff that falls down. Soil scientists call that detritus. It consumes that detritus and it makes it available to the plants. Now, most of us have, the guys that come around with the blowers and blow away all our leaves and make sure that there is no stuff like that. So we have to add compost back in, but the combination of 95% compost, any kind of organic material, and 5% worm castings gives you a living, breathing soil that it retains water better. It helps plants extend the reach of their roots so they can get at more water more readily, which means you need less water. It helps the soil breathe. They're like tiny little rototillers that are always working in your soil.
Yeah.
It's an easier way to get a more productive garden if you have worm castings and compost in your garden.
And you were explaining this to me before we got started, because I've read about it, but I don't really get it. Is these microbes actually somehow, or the plant somehow knows to tell the microbes what it needs, or vice versa? How does that work?
Yeah, so there's constant conversations going on between your plants and your microbes. Not the way we are having a conversation here, but the plant senses internally what additional nutrients it needs, and it produces what are called exudates. They're basically sugars that come off the roots, and those sugars feed the microbes that are the things that produce the micronutrients that are the things that the plant needs. Yeah. So the plant will be telling them which microbes to grow more, and they'll feeding them, and those microbes will cooperatively feed the plant. So there's an ongoing dialogue. An interesting thing that I found, strawberries are difficult to grow in Arizona, in Phoenix particularly, because the pH of our water comes out 7.7, 7.8, something like that, and strawberries like it around 5. Right. Microbes will actually help balance the pH in the environment where you're trying to grow strawberries. So I'm actually not encouraging you to grow strawberries. They're hard to grow in Phoenix. It's frustrating for most people. Yeah. But if you have a highly microbially active soil, you're more likely to have success.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. So it kind of just works in symphony together through the magic of Mother Nature.
Yeah. I mean, the analogy we always use is think about the most productive, most fertile place you've ever been. It's almost always a forest. That's almost the vision that people have, is they were walking through a pine forest somewhere, or if they were lucky enough to be in a rainforest. There's abundant growth everywhere. Nature has this figured out. Nobody is taking Osmocote into the rainforest and sprinkling commercial fertilizer. That stuff all works. It just works nicely in a closed circle where things feed each other again and again, and you get this abundant, robust growth. And if we do it, if we can emulate that in our gardens, we do less work, we have less inputs, and we certainly reduce the amount of stuff that just passes through into our water table. Yeah. So it's healthier for everyone and everything, and it's less expensive.
So tell me about this worm tea, which I have not purchased your worm tea, but you can do everything from what can you do with worm tea? Tell me this.
So worm tea is aerated worm castings.
Okay.
We suspend worm castings. We've got a secret recipe that we publish all the time, but it's basically worm castings and compost and fungi from mulch that we suspend in well water, and we aerate it, and we blow air in. And what that does is it causes the microbes to multiply. So soil scientists tell us that in a tablespoon of healthy soil, there'll be between 500 million and a billion bacteria and 3 or 4 yards of fungal hyphae. They're very small. Yeah. When we put them in this aeration, we get 100 times as many. So we get a tremendous growth of these microbes. You then take it and transfer it to your soil or to your plants. We use it as a foliar spray, and it'll actually adhere to the leaves. It'll thicken the leaves. So right now is actually a really good time before we get some hard freezes, which hopefully are coming. Yeah. It'll thicken the leaves to protect them against the frost. We do it in the late spring to help leaves and plants thicken to protect themselves against the sun. We use them as a soil drench just to dramatically increase the amount of microbes that are in our soil, and those microbes will colonize nicely in that environment. Because of the way our recipe works, we grow families of microbes that work together cooperatively. And so, unlike you can go down and buy mycorrhiza as a specific fungi that people might have heard of.
Right.
Unlike that, which doesn't necessarily thrive in the soil,
Right.
these collections, these families of microbes will do quite well in the soil. So we use it to prevent transplant shock. It helps trees get acclimated nicely. We use it, again, both in the early fall and in the late spring to allow plants to protect themselves against diseases. And it's that combination. It's what we're trying to accomplish in all of this is to get something converting that organic material into what is essentially some flavor of ammonia that the plant can consume rapidly. A burst of microbes helps make that happen fast.
That's amazing. So I lost a tree last summer, a pretty nice tree because of the heat. I've just planted a tree 3-4 weeks ago, had it planted. Too old to be digging holes myself. So I need to get some of that sprayed on my tree and around my tree, right? That'll help it?
Yeah. Now we brew it for Friday and Saturday mornings at the farm.
Right.
Because the way it works is, as we're blowing that air in, we get lots and lots of them. Once we take it off the air, then they slowly start to die.
Right.
So you'll have lots of it for 2-3 hours after you take it off of it, and then it starts to diminish. So you want to come down when you can get the tea and take it directly to your garden and use it. And use it in your garden. So here's the other thing.
Okay. Yeah.
So we didn't lose a single tree to heat at the worm farm over the summertime. I'm very proud of that.
That is great.
But that's you do that by taking care of your tree all year round consistently. 3 things that we recommend for all year round. Obviously, watering is important, and if you can get your tree to where you are watering deeply, infrequently, you'll train your tree's roots to go down deep where there is groundwater and where that even the 110-degree temperatures won't immediately dry that out. We want you to put a lasagna at the base of your tree. We want you to put some microbes in the form of worm castings down first, not a lot.
Yeah.
Couple of handfuls. We want you to put an inch or two of compost, and we want you to cover that with a whole bunch of mulch. And if you'll do that lasagna and then just keep doing it Valentine's Day, Memorial Day, and Labor Day, or whenever you see that compost drop down, that combination of those things will really help feed the tree and create a healthy living sort of environment. The third thing we want you to do is to just be selective about the kind of tree that you put in. Pick something that does well in Arizona.
Yeah.
You're more likely to have a success with a mesquite than you are with an avocado. Yes. Not to say you can't grow an avocado.
Right.
You can. It's just it takes. That's the master's class.
Yes.
The beginner's class is a mesquite or an acacia or a palm tree or something that does well in Arizona.
Yeah. I think we picked a pretty good one, that's for sure. So
good.
looks like I'll be making a trip down this weekend. Tell folks where the farm is. I didn't mention that.
Yeah, so we're in South Phoenix, 8430 South 19th Avenue. We're just south of Baseline, about a half a mile south of Baseline on 19th Avenue.
Yeah.
Got a big sign, and it looks like a farm, but come on in. We're open all the time.
It really is fantastic. So on my first journey down there, I was having such a great time with all the worms and everything like that. And then Zach had to show me, hang on, Zach, I want to get the right name, the black soldier fly larvae. Okay, so these black soldier fly larvae are big honking larvae, and they weren't really that disgusting. I mean, but it was just different. But then you took me over to where you raised the black soldier fly larvae, and there's flies flying all around in there, and that just blew my mind away. Because then you were feeding them to the chickens, and the chicken eggs were fantastic. Because whenever you go down there, by the way, pro tip, folks, go down there and just see if they've got some eggs on the stack that they can sell. If you do, buy a dozen. I recommend it. But so, where did the black soldier fly larvae come from?
Okay, so 2 of our goals are aimed around sustainability, and a chicken is an awesome sustainable animal because you can feed it stuff that you can grow on the farm,
right?
and it gives you an egg every day or two. And it does that for a long period of time. And when you need some more, you just let them sit on them and they hatch, and you can have more. Chickens needed the alfalfa that we could grow, but they also needed a protein source. I thought I was going to feed them worms. They'll eat 40, 50 worms a day, and we couldn't breed them fast enough to do that. So we went looking for something else, and we found the black soldier fly larva. They are perhaps the most efficient composter on the planet. They eat 50 times their body weight in any kind of garbage, any kind of food waste, meat, cheese, vegetables, fruit. It doesn't matter. They consume it. They go from microscopic, so small you can't see them, to an inch or an inch and a quarter in their 21-day life cycle. And they turn that waste into 40% protein, 10% fat, which makes them just an ideal supplemental feed for any of your poultry. And for a lot of reasons, dried black soldier fly larvae have become popular, but they're being raised in places that just don't do it organically the way that we do. And we wanted to be very careful about what we were feeding our hens. At the same time, one of our goals is to be able to take a whole bunch of garbage and turn that garbage into something useful. And these guys, 600 pounds, we're producing now 600 pounds a week. 600 pounds of larvae will eat 2 or 3 tons of food waste.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so last year we got, as an example, we got all of the food waste from the 14th hole at the Phoenix Open, at the WM Phoenix Open. They brought it to our farm. We fed it to the larvae. We fed the larvae to the chickens, and then we had lots and lots of delicious eggs. So it's a really cool circle. We're looking at and one of the features of this that I like best. There's no water added in this process. So they get all of the water they need from the food waste that we give them, which means I can raise today 600 pounds of protein a week in the desert with no added water.
Wow.
And we can increase that almost exponentially. As a boy and a girl, they mate. The girl lays eggs between 500 and 700 eggs. So we could get 250 times bigger every week if we wanted to.
Oh my goodness gracious!
So it's the capacity for waste consumption is gigantic if we can figure out how to do it. And we're playing with the commercialization of it.
Yeah, I was going to say, upscaling that, it would be harder than upscaling worms, I would think, because worms stay where you want them. Flies don't stay where you want them, yes?
Yeah, our challenge, so we're trying to build our capacity and our demand at the same time. We don't want to end up with 6,000 pounds of larvae that we can't do anything with. Interestingly enough, we've talked to some chicken producers, and the volume that they need is just gigantic.
Yeah.
For a place like Hickman's, it's really, really a huge amount, and we're not there yet. But we're playing with that.
Yeah.
And we're looking at other ways to deploy this.
And this is sitting in front of me. This is your BSFL nutrient. I love that. So what is this liquid concoction that I have here?
Right. So I spend more time than my dinner guests like to know studying what's going on in the bug world. We here in the U.S., we feed more meat to our dogs and cats than all of the people in India eat. Your dog needs protein, but she doesn't care where that source of protein is.
Right.
So we started looking for ways to use insect protein in place of something else. We're working with some dog and cat food suppliers to look at replacing that. But one of the things that has always frustrated me is that one of the more popular fertilizers is fish hydrolysate, or some kind of fish emulsion fertilizer. And the way you make fish emulsion fertilizer is you take what's called waste fish, and you grind that up, and you use it to make a fertilizer. And what we found, and they say, well, it's waste fish, so it's not negative, but in fact, something eats that. Whatever you take out of the ocean, there's something else that was going to eat that thing, and we're better off leaving fish in the ocean. And so we started playing with the properties of the larva to see if it could be used in replace of the properties of the fish. It can be as a protein additive in chicken feed. It can be as a protein additive in dogs and cat food. So we looked at this, and with some entomologists, both on our staff and from ASU, we've figured out that not only can it do as much as fish emulsion or fish hydrolysate fertilizer can do, but it has a half a dozen properties that fish doesn't have that make it better. So it's as good a feed as fish. It's more sustainable because it's taking waste out of our landfill and using it, but it also has some enzymes that trigger healing properties in trees and plants. So if you have a tree that's stressed, this product in most circumstances will help that tree come back. If it's dead, it's dead.
Yeah.
But it has triggering properties. It has an odor. And I don't find it to be an awful odor. But for those of you that have used fish emulsion fertilizer, it stinks.
Yeah.
And mostly it attracts your dogs. That's mostly what it does. Your dogs and cats
They love it.
want to come play with that. This actually will repel most insects. So it again, not insecticide, but it will, it's just unattractive to other insects. They have pheromones that repel regular houseflies. So it's got a couple of really key benefits and a whole bunch of stuff that it replaces. And so it's a sustainable alternative to fish fertilizer.
So obviously there's directions on here on how to use this, but once again it seems pretty straightforward, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
No big like I'll be able to figure it out, right?
It's so a tree in trouble needs a cup or two of this and then a heavy watering once a week.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
That's crazy.
For your plants and your vegetables, if you're used to using fish hydrolysate, you can replace this exactly the same way as the fish hydrolysate. It's a little bit less expensive, it's more sustainable, and it's got some benefits that you won't see. We have compared this, and ASU has helped us compare this. We're getting 35 to 40% better produce productivity out of our plants. We're not necessarily getting bigger plants, but we're getting we're getting more fruit off of those plants.
Right. That's fantastic. And you were, last time I was down there trying to figure how many thousands of larvae do you have?
Lots now. Yeah, lots and lots.
And you were trying to figure out what do we do with all these larvae?
Yeah.
Well, this is a great idea.
Yeah. So we're actually really excited, and we've Summer Winds Nurseries and the Whitfield on Glendale also sells this for us now. We're trying to get it out into the marketplace, and I think once people try it, they're going to really like what it does for their plants, particularly stressed trees. If you have a bare root tree that's underperformed, if you have a peach tree that didn't take off, you have a citrus tree that hasn't seemed to thrive, we're finding that this triggers growth mechanisms in the tree that produces a really good outcome.
Oh, that's fantastic. So I want to let people know that Zach's all over the internet. So is the Arizona Worm Farm. And you can learn things like how to do your own vermicomposting on a small level. And there's a whole lot of tips on there. And I would say for beginning farmers, raised beds is the way to go. And even if you have to buy a portable bed you can drag around your yard, that's the way to go. It makes it easy, right?
Absolutely.
And if you're just thinking about start simple and, grow the crops that we know, like for instance, I've got lettuce planted right now. It's a cool crop time. And you just have to we have to follow Angela's timetable, don't we?
That's right. Growing in the garden produces a Arizona Phoenix specific timetable of things you can grow. But you're exactly right. Start with a raised bed, start with a small one that you can keep your arms around, and grow easy stuff. Grow some carrots and grow some radishes or beets. Grow broccoli and cauliflower. It's stuff it's relatively easy, it's relatively simple. Your first crop is usually your worst crop,
right?
And they get better and better and better after that. But you'll get a head start. If you get good soil, put some worms in there, it makes everything easier.
Plus, you'll find out around your house because of the shade and the different trees and everything, what's a good place this time of year and what's a good place this time of year. And so you start learning those things, which is really kind of cool.
Yeah, and so my grandkids were at the farm this morning. They will eat things out of the backyard that they won't eat in a restaurant or a grocery store. And you'll find that a freshly grown tomato out of your backyard is spectacularly delicious.
Yes, absolutely.
We know that fruits and vegetables are grown other places, and they're harvested way early in order to get them to our table.
Right.
We know that they're harvested before they're really ripe and ready to go. And so we've got a head start in terms of taste and quality and enjoyment. The tomato you grow in your backyard that grows till it's fully ripe and ready to pick, it's just going to be a better tomato. The carrots are going to be better.
Habaneros are better.
Yep.
That's one of my faves, habaneros. What do you see in the next 3 years of the farm going? What direction do you want to take it?
Well, so we're working on a couple of what we hope will be significant activities. We're working on using passive solar heating and cooling type activities to try and extend our growing season. We are playing with some specialized varieties of vegetables, mostly going back to native stuff, to try and get stuff that will do better in our changing seasons. And we're hoping to work on the 2 or 3 areas where we really are excited about focusing on better use and better management of water, reduction of fossil fuels, increase in the amount of food waste that we can take in and use to feed to other stuff.
Yeah, and I didn't think I asked you, how much food waste do you take in a week?
Yeah, so it's seasonal, but in general we're getting 320 cubic yards of waste. We define waste as food waste, horse manure, which we use for our composting, and then ground landscape waste that we do in a partnership with the City of Phoenix in a landfill diversion program. So just to put that in perspective, those big 40-yard containers that you see with stuff in them, we get 6 to 8 of those every single week. That we turn into either compost or food for one of our herds.
Yeah, from one of your herds, that's for sure. So you're not open Sundays, but you're open every other day of the week, correct?
We are, Monday through Friday from 8 to 4 and Saturdays from 8 to 1.
And also you have special programs, tours, and sometimes teaching groups and all that kind of stuff that folks can find online. So there's all kinds of stuff to do there. But I would just encourage folks to get down there and check it out and talk to the people there, because they're all so super knowledgeable. And, believe me, you will buy worms and you will love worms and you'll have a great time. I mean, you just will.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a free self-tour anytime you want. So come on down. We've got worms you can play with and worms you can take home.
All right. Zach Brooks, Arizona Worm Farm. Thanks for being with us today. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it.
Thanks for doing what you do, too, because it really is a cool story.
Thank you very much.
This is Beyond the Green Screen, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.